This is Duke University.
I think it's easy for all of us, for Americans, to lose perspective about our relative weight and influence and potential in the world. The truth is, the last decade and a half since 9/11 have been a pretty rough period for the United States and the world. 2 long, protracted, painful conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, 2008 global financial crisis whose consequences are still being felt by lots of Americans, the rise of ISIS, yet another very violent, very dangerous Sunni extremist group, and then, as I mentioned before, the continuing and sometimes depressing dysfunction of Washington and the political system, which always reminds me of the famous comment from Winston Churchill that the thing he liked most about Americans is that they always did the right thing in the end. They just like to exhaust all the alternatives first. And you can see evidence of that almost every day in Washington. But my point is simply that I think the declinist narrative about the United States and the world is vastly overstated. I do not mean this as a statement of American arrogance, but at least as far out into the 21st century as I can see over the next few decades, the United States really is likely to be the first among unequals in the world. And by that I mean if you look at almost any measure of power, of national power in the international system, the United States has huge advantages. Certainly in terms of military power, we still spend as much every year as the next 9 countries put together. Our economy today is still the biggest, the most innovative, the most resilient in the world. Energy is a huge advantage for the United States, not only in terms of our increasing independence in hydrocarbons, but also the reality that the United States is still today the world's leading power in terms of clean energy technology. Demography is an advantage for the United States, especially if you compare it to other major powers, our peer competitors in the world, whether it's China or Russia or the European Union or Japan. We're still a relatively younger and more mobile population, especially if we can ever get immigration reform right. Geography is, I think, a natural advantage as well in the sense of our 2 liquid assets, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, which insulate us to some extent from the kind of risks and dangers that most other major powers in the world are more vulnerable to. And finally, soft power. And here I do not mean the power of the Kardashian family, but the attractiveness, I think, of American society at our best, at least, and the fact that the United States, unique amongst major powers in the world, has a capacity that's unrivaled for building coalitions and attracting allies and partners as well. So for all of those reasons, it seems to me at least that the United States has a window before us, stretching out over at least the next 2 or 3 decades, within which we can help shape that complicated international landscape and the institutions that are on it before it gets shaped for us by the rise of other powers and other forces and other events. And I think there are going to be 3 important ingredients in that effort to take advantage of that window: reinforcing the domestic foundations of American power, rebalancing both the tools of national security policy from diplomacy through the use of force to fit the realities of the 21st century and taking into account the lessons of the last 15 years, and also rebalancing our investments across critical regions of the world, and finally reshaping institutions and alliances to fit the realities not of 1946 or 1976, but of 2016.